the most famous parable about gifts in the entire Bible is not about gifts. That sentence needs a moment to land. Because the parable of the talents has been preached as a motivational speech about using your abilities for 2,000 years. Your singing voice, your leadership skills, your creativity, your time. Every sermon version of this story ends the same way. God gave you talents. Use them. Do not bury them. The master is coming back. And that reading is not wrong exactly. But it is a costume. It is the surface of the story wearing the clothes of the real story. And the real story underneath is so much more unsettling and so much more personal that most preachers do not stay in it long enough to find it. Here is the detail that changes everything. The English word talent, meaning a natural ability, did not exist when Jesus told this parable. It entered the language more than 1,000 years later, through medieval Latin, precisely because translators borrowed it from this story. The Greek word talanton meant one thing only: a unit of weight. A mass of silver so heavy you needed both arms to carry it. Roughly 75 pounds of metal. So the story Jesus told was not about natural gifts. It was about weight. About what it costs to hold something that belongs to someone else. About what happens to a person when they receive something heavy from someone they are not sure they can trust. And when you understand that, when you understand what the third servant actually buried, and why the parable stops being a motivational speech, it becomes a mirror. Matthew 25. The last week of Jesus' life. He is sitting on the Mount of Olives with his closest disciples. Jerusalem is visible across the valley, the temple gleaming white and gold in the afternoon sun. Jesus has just told them it will be destroyed. Every stone pulled down. The disciples are shaken. They want a timeline. They want to know when. What they get instead is 3 stories. And the emotional weight behind all 3 stories is something most readers feel. Because most readers do not know what Jesus knows in this moment. He knows he is going to die. In days. He has spent 3 years training these men, pouring everything into them. And now he is sitting on a hillside, trying to prepare them for a future they cannot imagine yet. A future where he will be gone, where they will be the ones left holding everything he gave them, and where the question of what they do with it will define everything. The 3 parables of Matthew 25 are not abstract theology. They are a father talking to his children, the week before he leaves and will not be coming back for a long time. They are the most urgent teaching he ever gave. The 10 virgins, be ready. The talents, be faithful with what I gave you. The sheep and the goats, love the people I love. 3 angles on one question. What does it mean to live faithfully in the interval between departure and return? The talents parable sits in the center. And its question, the one underneath the surface about money and servants, is the most personal question in the entire discourse. What do you actually believe about the one who gave you what you have? Let us start with the numbers, because the numbers are the first thing that should stop you. The master distributes his estate. Matthew uses the word huparkonta, his possessions, his entire property, to 3 servants before he leaves, and he gives it according to kata 10 idion dunamin, each according to his own capacity. The word dunamin is the root of dynamite. It means inherent power, personal capacity. The master has watched these men. He knows them. This is not a random distribution. He calibrates the trust to the person. 5 talents to one, 2 to another, 1 to the third. Now the numbers. 1 talent equaled roughly 6,000 denarii. A denarius was a standard day's wage for a laborer. 1 talent, therefore, represented approximately 20 years of work. Not 20 years of income for a comfortable professional. 20 years of daily wages for an ordinary working man. 5 talents. 100 years of wages. A person could work their entire life and their children's lives and not accumulate what this servant was handed. 2 talents. 40 years. 1 talent. 20 years. Nobody in this parable received something small. Even the servant who got the least was holding 2 decades of someone else's labor in his arms. And the master walked away. That is the first thing the parable wants you to feel. Not the abstract concept of stewardship, the physical weight of receiving something this large from someone who trusted you with it, and then left. Because the weight is not metaphor. It is the emotional reality of every human being who has been given something significant by someone who matters to them and then been left to decide what to do with it. The talent in your arms is whatever it is for you. The relationship that was placed in your care. The opportunity that arrived without a manual. The calling that felt too large from the moment you understood it. The resources that came with no instructions and an owner who is not currently in the room. The parable begins at the moment of receiving. And it is asking from the very first verse, how do you hold something this heavy from someone you may not fully understand yet? The first two servants do something with what they receive. Matthew records it with almost no detail. The 5-talent servant goes and trades and earns 5 more. The 2-talent servant does the same and earns 2 more. No business plan. No strategy session. No explanation of method. Some manuscripts attach the word euthys immediately to the first servant's action. He did not deliberate. He moved. But what the text skips past, we need to slow down for. Because trading in first century Palestine was not safe. The economy ran on agriculture, livestock, and trade routes that were genuinely dangerous. Bandits. Weather. Political instability. You could invest in a caravan that never arrived. You could buy grain and find the market had collapsed. You could lend to a money changer. What the master later suggests the third servant should have done at minimum. And have the transaction go wrong in a dozen ways. These 2 servants could have lost everything. Doubled a talent is not a sure thing. Doubled 100 years of wages is an enormous risk. And the parable never says the outcome was guaranteed. It says they acted. The action is the point. What followed was a consequence of what they chose to do first. And here is what the master says to both of them when he returns. To the 5-talent servant, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will set you over many things. Enter into the joy of your master. To the 2-talent servant, the same words. Word for word, in the Greek, identical. The commendation does not scale with the output. The 5-talent servant produced more. The 2-talent servant produced less. The master does not notice the difference. He notices something else entirely. The Greek words the master uses are agathos and pistos. Agathos does not mean good in a vague moral sense. It means devoted, valuable, someone whose character made them genuinely useful. Pistos does not mean faithful in a generic religious sense. It means trustworthy, reliable, someone you can count on when you are not in the room. The master is not paying compliments. He is naming what he actually saw in these 2 men. Devotion paired with reliability, and both servants hear the same name because both demonstrated the same character. And then the reward. Enter into the joy of your master. The Greek preposition is eyes into, not toward. The servant is not handed joy like a bonus. He is invited to step inside an experience that already belongs to the master. The joy already exists. It has been there all along. And now the faithful servant is welcomed into it. This is not a salary increase. This is intimacy. This is the master opening the door to his own inner experience and saying, come in. And what comes with it is more work. More responsibility. I will set you over many things. The faithful servant does not get to retire. He gets brought further in. If a century of human labor is a few things, the master's actual words, then the many things waiting on the other side of faithfulness are beyond anything the servant has categories to imagine. Now the third servant. He goes and digs a hole in the ground and hides the talent. And here is where most readings of this parable go wrong. Because most readers assume the third servant was lazy, irresponsible, spiritually negligent. Someone who wasted what he was given because he simply did not care enough. The text will not support that reading. In the ancient world, burying entrusted money was not reckless. It was the responsible option. Rabbinic tradition held that burying was one of the most reliable ways to guard someone else's property. Coins do not rot underground. Thieves cannot find what they cannot see. Archaeologists working across first-century Israel have uncovered hundreds of coin hoards buried in exactly this way. Wrapped in cloth, sealed in jars, pressed into the earth beneath house floors. It was common. It was expected. In a world without banks as we know them, the ground was the vault. So when the third servant buries the talent, he is not making a careless mistake. He is making a careful decision. He is choosing the conservative option, the responsible option, the one that guarantees he will be able to return exactly what he received. He is protecting himself. And then the master returns. Matthew 25-20, 4-5. Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. Read that 3 times. Slowly. Because what the servant says in those 2 sentences is the most theologically significant speech in the entire parable. He does not say he was confused about what to do. He does not claim he tried and failed. He does not apologize. He explains. And his explanation is not about strategy or skill or opportunity. It is about character. The master's character. The picture of the master that the servant has been carrying the entire time. He calls the master skleros. The English translators say hard, but the Greek word means something more specific. Dried out. Rough-surfaced. Something that resists pressure. The word is used in Greek literature for parched soil that will not absorb water, for surfaces too rigid to work with. A skleros person is inflexible, unyielding, impossible to satisfy. Someone who does not bend toward you. And then the specific accusation. Reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter. The servant is saying the master takes harvest from fields he never planted. He profits from labor he did not perform. He shows up at the end and claims what other people built. In the servant's mind, the master is not generous. The master is an exploiter. Someone who sets people up to fail and then punishes the failure. That theology, that reading of the master's character, is the root of the burial. Not laziness, not carelessness. A considered theological judgment that produced a reasonable protective response. If you genuinely believe the person who gave you something is waiting to punish you for losing it, you will not risk it. You will bury it. You will protect the principle. You will return exactly what you received and call that faithfulness. And the burial feels like the right thing to do from inside that belief system. It feels responsible. It feels humble. He is not trying to profit from the master's wealth. He is not trying to use it for himself. He is just keeping it safe until the master comes back. But here is what actually happened. He received the largest gift of his life. 20 years of wages. From someone who trusted him enough to leave it in his hands and walk away. And he looked at that gift, and instead of seeing trust, he saw a trap. Instead of seeing generosity, he saw exposure. Instead of seeing an invitation to participate in something, he saw a setup for blame, and so he buried the invitation. The master's response confirms that the third servant's theology was the problem. He does not say, "You misunderstood me." I am not actually harsh. He does not provide a defense of his character. He takes the servant's own premise and turns it inside out. You knew that I reap where I did not sow. Then you ought to have put my money with the bankers, even on your own terms. Even if everything you believe about me is true, your behavior makes no sense. If the master is as demanding as the servant claims, depositing the money would have been the minimum viable response. A harsh master would be more furious at nothing than at the simplest possible action. The logic is devastating. The servant's own stated fear, if it were genuine, should have driven him to do something. The fear was not the real problem. The real problem was underneath the fear. A quiet decision. The master is not worth the risk. This relationship is not worth engaging with. The weight in my arms is a problem to be managed rather than a trust to be honored. That is what the master sees when he looks at the third servant's face. Not a fearful person, A person who decided, before the master ever left, that the relationship was not worth investing in. The third servant's instinct is not new. Genesis 3. After the fall, God comes walking in the garden, and Adam says, "I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." Fear. Hiding. A distorted picture of who God is. The serpent had done something specific in the garden. He had reframed God's generosity as control. He told Eve that the prohibition against the tree was not protection. It was God hoarding something. God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. Genesis 3-5. The serpent did not say God was evil. He said God's generosity had a hidden agenda, that what looked like a gift was actually a setup, that the one who gave had ulterior motives for giving. Eve believed it. Adam followed. And the first thing they did after eating was hide. The third servant runs the same script 3,000 years later. He takes the master's generosity, the act of entrusting him with 20 years of wages, and reframes it as exploitation. He sees the gift as a trap. He expects the worst from the master's character. And when the master comes back, he does the only thing that logic makes sense inside that belief system. He hands back the silver. Clean. Accounted for. Every coin. He handed back the entire 20 years of wages, and calls it faithfulness. This is the oldest pattern in Scripture. When you believe the giver is against you, you bury what you have and hope he does not notice. When you believe his generosity is a setup for blame, you minimize exposure. When you believe he reaps where he did not sow, you make sure he has nothing to reap from you. Hiding looks like safety. The parable calls it wicked, not because the word wicked means violent or malicious. The Greek is poneros, the direct opposite of agathos, the word the master used for the first two servants. If agathos means devoted, valuable, someone who made themselves genuinely useful, then poneros means someone whose inner posture made them useless to the one they were supposed to serve. And okneros, the word translated lazy, does not mean physically inactive. It means shrinking back, retreating when called forward. The word describes a person paralyzed by reluctance, someone who pulls away from rather than moves toward the thing asked of them. The master is not calling the third servant a criminal. He is naming what the servant's theology produced in him, a man who received generosity and responded with suspicion, whose inner posture toward the master made him incapable of participation. And that incapacity, not the buried coin, is the tragedy. Look at the two destinations in this parable. The first two servants receive an invitation. Enter into the joy of your master. The third servant receives a sentence. Cast into the outer darkness. In Greek, to skotos, to exoteron. The darkness that is outside. Outside the house, outside the feast, outside the master's presence. And here is what most readings miss about that outer darkness. The third servant chose it first. Before the master returned, before the judgment was rendered, in the long interval between the giving and the reckoning, the third servant had already placed himself outside. Outside the risk, outside the participation, outside the relationship with the master that trading would have required. The outer darkness is not a punishment that arrives from outside the servant's choices. It is the destination that the servant navigated toward with every day he left the talent in the ground. He wanted nothing to do with the master's work while the master was away, and when the master returns, the distance the servant chose has become permanent. He wanted to be left alone with the coin. And he is. Contrast that with what the faithful servants receive. Enter into the joy of your master. The master's joy. Not a new joy created as a reward. The joy that already belongs to the master. The joy he has been carrying. The joy that exists on the other side of faithfulness, that was there the whole time, waiting for the servants who trusted him enough to risk. The writer of Hebrews connects this directly to Jesus. Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. Hebrews 12:2. The joy of the master in Matthew 25, and the joy set before Christ in Hebrews 12 share more than vocabulary. They share a pattern. Faithful action in the present, sustained by a joy that already exists on the other side of it. Jesus knows what it means to carry something heavy for the sake of a future that has not yet arrived. The master in the parable is not a distant executive, demanding returns from a comfortable chair. He is the one who walked the road himself, who bore the weight first, who endured the interval between promise and fulfillment at a cost that makes every servant's risk look small. The parable of the talents, told in the last week of Jesus' life, is not just a story about servants and silver. It is Jesus telling his disciples something true about himself and about what he is about to do. He is about to entrust them with the most significant thing anyone has ever been entrusted with: the gospel, the mission, the kingdom, and he needs them to understand something before he leaves. The master who is about to go away is not scleros. He is not harsh. He is not setting them up to fail. He gave everything, including his own life, because he genuinely wants them to participate in what he is building. The question is whether they will believe that. Stop and look at what the parable has actually asked. Not, what are your talents? That is not the question. Not, how productive are you for God? Also not the question. The question underneath every layer of this story is one sentence. What do you believe about the one who gave you what you have? Because that single belief, that one theological conviction about the character of the master, determines everything that follows. It determined whether the 5-talent servant moved immediately or waited. It determined whether the 2-talent servant traded or deliberated. It determined whether the 3rd servant risked or buried. The first 2 servants looked at what the master gave them and saw an invitation. Someone who believed in their capacity, enough to trust them with his entire estate and walk away. Someone who expected participation not because he was demanding, but because he was generous. Someone worth risking for. The 3rd servant looked at the same master, the same generosity, the same departing gift, and saw a threat, a trap, an exploiter waiting at the end of the interval to punish whatever went wrong. Same master, same gift, opposite conclusions. And those conclusions determined everything. The parable measures only that. Not the amount of the return. Not the method of the trading. Not the volume of the outcome. Whether you trusted the master enough to move. So what does this look like in an actual life? Not in a sermon illustration. In the specific, personal, unglamorous reality of your actual days. The 3rd servant is not a cartoon villain. He is recognizable. He is the person who has a gift for teaching but never steps into it because the voice in their head says, "You will do it poorly, and God will be disappointed." He is the person who senses a call towards something unfamiliar. A ministry, a conversation, a relationship, a creative risk. And who hears, "Stay safe. Do not put yourself out there. If it goes wrong, he will not be pleased." That voice sounds like wisdom. The parable says it sounds like the 3rd servant. And here is what makes the 3rd servant's situation so difficult to see clearly from the inside. His burial looked responsible. It looked humble. He was not trying to use the master's money for himself. He was not squandering it. He was being careful with something that did not belong to him. But careful with what does not belong to you is not the same as faithful to the one who gave it. The master never said, "Guard this until I return." The act of giving was itself the instruction. Receiving the talent was the commission. The only question was whether you trusted the giver enough to actually use the gift. And the prior question, the one that determines everything, is what you believe the giver is like. If you believe God is scleros, harsh, unyielding, waiting to reap what he did not sow, then every risk looks like exposure. Every failure looks like evidence he was right about you. Every step forward feels like walking toward judgment rather than toward participation. And you bury. Not because you are careless, because you are afraid. And because underneath the fear is a reading of God's character that the cross directly contradicts. Because the cross is the master's answer to the 3rd servant's accusation. He takes what he did not earn, he reaps where he did not sow, he profits from labor he did not perform. The cross says the opposite. The master went himself. He walked the road. He bore the cost. He gave the estate. He submitted to the judgment that belonged to the servants who had wasted it. He did not take what he did not earn. He gave what cost him everything. The master in the parable is not the harsh exploiter the third servant described. And the cross is the evidence, the most significant evidence in all of human history, that the one who entrusted you with what you carry is the kind of master who enters the interval himself, bears the weight himself, and invites you into a joy that already exists on the other side of it. The question is whether you believe that, and the answer to that question, lived out over the days and months and years of your one life, is the only thing the parable actually measures. There is an image I cannot get out of my mind since studying this parable. Archaeologists working across Israel have found them for decades. Coin hoards from the 1st century, buried in the ground under house floors, wrapped in cloth, sealed in jars, perfectly preserved. Some of these hoards were found in homes destroyed during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The owners had buried their wealth to protect it during the crisis. They intended to come back. They never did. The silver sat in the darkness for 2,000 years, untouched, unseeing the sun, doing nothing. The coins survived. Everything that could have been done with them did not. That is the image the parable leaves behind. Not a dramatic moral failure. Not a servant who gambled recklessly and lost. A mass of silver sitting in a hole in the earth, doing exactly what it was designed not to do, waiting in the dark. Perfectly preserved. Completely pointless. The third servant returned every coin. Intact. Every denarius accounted for. He handed back the entire 20 years of wages. His hands were clean. His accounting was perfect. He had done the one thing the master never asked for. Safe. And safe, the parable says, was the one posture the master could not receive. Because safe meant the servant had already decided the relationship was not worth the risk. That the joy on the other side of faithfulness was not real, or not available, or not worth entering. That the master's character was such that hiding was the better bet. And what the master saw when that servant stood before him was not a failure of strategy. Not an insufficient return on investment. He saw something far more painful than that. He saw a man who had spent the entire interval, all the days between the giving and the reckoning, believing that his master was someone worth hiding from. 2,000 years of English usage have turned this story into a motivational speech about using your gifts. But Jesus told it in the last week of his life to a group of men who were about to receive something heavier than silver. He told it because he needed them to know before he left, before the weight was placed in their arms, what kind of master was putting it there. Not scleros. Not harsh. Not setting them up for failure. Someone who trusted them enough to leave. Someone who calibrated the gift to their actual capacity. Someone whose joy was already real and already waiting, and whose door would open to anyone who trusted him enough to move. The parable does not ask how much you produced. It asks what you believed about the one who gave it to you. And it is still asking. Right now, in whatever interval you are currently living in, whatever the master has placed in your arms that feels too heavy, too risky, too likely to end in loss. The coins that stayed in the ground for 2,000 years were perfectly preserved and completely wasted. Enter into the joy. It is already there. If this changed how you read the parable of the talents, if it moved the story from a motivational speech into something that actually asks you something, share it with someone who has been burying something out of fear. Not because they are careless, because they have a wrong picture of the master. And the right picture changes everything. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Leave a comment, even one word. It helps more people find this than you know. And to anyone holding something heavy right now, something entrusted to you that feels too large to risk, the master who gave it to you is not scleros. The cross proved it. He is the kind of master whose joy is already real, and he is waiting to say, "Come in." God bless you.